He lived in a quiet neighborhood where the streets were lined with trees that swayed gently in the wind, and children's laughter often filled the air. On most days, everything seemed peaceful, calm, and ordinary. He kept to himself mostly, not because he was unfriendly, but because he valued peace and simplicity. His home was well kept, a reflection of his disciplined nature. The lawn was always trimmed, the windows clean, and the small garden in the front yard bloomed with colorful flowers that he tended to carefully. People in the neighborhood saw him as polite, helpful, and quiet. Some waved when they passed, some nodded, and he responded with a soft smile. No one would have guessed that there was a man living behind that ordinary house who had experienced some of the toughest challenges life could throw at a person. His mornings were quiet routines, almost like clockwork. He woke up early, sometimes before sunrise, and took a walk around the neighborhood. He liked the calm, the way the world was still just waking up. Sometimes he would stop at a tree, run his fingers over the bark, and take a deep breath. It gave him a sense of control, a feeling that despite the chaos of life, he could find moments of stillness. After the walk, he would return home, make a simple breakfast, and sit by the window watching the world go by. His life seemed normal, even mundane, but that was exactly how he liked it. He liked normal, safe, peaceful. Despite this calm, there was always a quiet intensity in him. Not the kind people could notice immediately, but the kind that showed in small ways, the way he carried himself, the way he observed everything around him, how he never seemed startled or flustered no matter what happened. It was almost like he could anticipate things before they occurred. He noticed small details that most people ignored. A car parked slightly too close to a driveway, a stranger walking unusually fast, the way people's eyes moved when they were lying or hiding something. Some neighbors occasionally thought he was just unusually attentive, but the truth was much deeper than that. That attention to detail came from years of training, discipline, and experiences that very few could imagine. He often spent afternoons working in his garage, repairing things around the house, or sometimes building small projects for himself. Neighbors could sometimes see him there bent over a table, focused on his work, hands steady, calm, precise. He liked creating order, building things, fixing things, because it gave him a sense of control. There was satisfaction in knowing that he could handle whatever needed to be handled. But he rarely spoke about his past, and when people asked, he would smile lightly and say, "Just old training." Most people accepted it and left it at that. They had no idea that behind those quiet words was someone who had been through some of the most rigorous, dangerous, and intense experiences life could offer. He had been trained in a way that most people could not imagine, physically, mentally, emotionally. He had faced life or death situations, had seen the darkest sides of humanity, and had survived where most would not. Yet here he was, living a calm, quiet life far from the chaos of the past. The neighborhood seemed peaceful, but not everyone welcomed him. Some people saw his skin color and judged him before they even spoke to him. There were whispers, looks, and subtle gestures. He rarely paid attention, because he had learned that most prejudice came from ignorance and fear. Some neighbors avoided eye contact, some muttered under their breath, and some outright disrespected him. But he stayed calm. He did not retaliate, did not show anger, and did not give them any reason to notice his strength. He believed in control, in patience, in letting the world reveal itself over time. It was a quiet power, a calm strength that people did not see until it was too late. One afternoon, as he was trimming his garden, he noticed a group of young men across the street. They were laughing loudly, but there was a strange tension in their voices, something harsh and edged. They were staring at him in a way that felt different from usual. At first, he thought nothing of it. People sometimes stared for no reason, but something about the way they moved, the way their eyes lingered, made him pause. He stopped trimming the plants and stood still, hands on the small garden shears, eyes scanning their movements. He did not confront them, did not shout, but his presence alone was enough to make them shift uncomfortably. They were not used to someone noticing them this closely. Most people in the neighborhood would have ignored them, looked down, or smiled nervously. He simply watched quietly, carefully. Days passed, and he began to notice subtle signs that the group was becoming bolder. Trash left on his lawn, doors rattled as they walked past, strange noises at night. Nothing dangerous yet, just signs that they were testing boundaries, seeing if he would react. And he did not. He remained calm, methodical, and observant. He documented everything mentally, noticed patterns, and began thinking about ways to respond if things escalated. But he did not let it consume him. His life had taught him that panic and anger cloud judgment. Preparation and calmness were far stronger than any momentary display of force. Even though he remained calm, a small part of him could not ignore the rising tension. He remembered how quickly situations could spiral out of control, how dangerous people could become when fueled by hate or fear. He began taking small precautions, locking doors, checking cameras, ensuring that he could defend his home if necessary. Not because he wanted a fight, but because he knew the world did not always respect peace, and even the strongest man needed preparation in the face of ignorance and malice. His neighbors, mostly oblivious to the tension, went about their lives. Children still played in the streets, and families walked their dogs. No one could have guessed that right across the street, a storm was quietly brewing. A storm born from prejudice, ignorance, and arrogance. The group had no idea who they were dealing with. They thought he was just a quiet man, someone they could intimidate, someone who would back down. And that misjudgment was about to become their biggest mistake, because beneath the calm, beneath the ordinary life, was a man who had survived challenges beyond imagination, a man who had trained for years to handle danger, to remain calm under pressure, and to respond with precision when necessary. A man whose very existence demanded respect, whether people knew it or not. Evenings were the most peaceful part of his day, yet they were tinged with anticipation. As he sat on the porch sipping tea and watching the sunset, he could feel the tension lingering. It was almost invisible, like the slight shift in the wind before a storm. He did not speak of it to anyone. He did not need to. He understood that life was full of hidden dangers, and he had learned long ago that the best response was always calm observation and readiness. He liked to watch the world in these moments, noticing small details, the way the streetlights flickered on, the way leaves rustled in the evening breeze, the distant sound of a car engine. Each detail mattered, and each one helped him prepare even in ways people could not see. And so life continued, quiet on the surface, but beneath it, a storm was quietly gathering. He went about his routines, tended his home, cared for his garden, and interacted politely with neighbors. Yet in the back of his mind, he knew that the world could not always remain peaceful. The group across the street was testing boundaries, fueled by ignorance, and soon their actions would force a confrontation. He did not want it. He never wanted trouble, but he was prepared for it. And that preparation was not something most people could imagine. It was a quiet power, the kind that does not announce itself but changes everything when it is finally revealed. The quiet of the neighborhood was broken one night by the sounds of destruction. The group that had been watching him for weeks finally decided to act. They came under the cover of darkness, their movements loud enough to announce their presence. Windows rattled, doors shook, and the peaceful calm that had defined the street was replaced with chaos. Trash cans were overturned, flower pots smashed, and hateful words spray-painted across the walls of his home. The laughter and shouting of the group carried across the quiet street, a sharp contrast to the gentle hum of the night. Inside, he had been reading, sitting quietly in his living room with the soft glow of a lamp illuminating his calm face. When he heard the first crash, he did not panic. He did not shout or run. Instead, he placed his book down slowly and stood, moving with quiet precision to the window. From there, he could see everything clearly. The vandals in his yard, their faces twisted with anger and arrogance, unaware of the mistake they had made by choosing his house. His gaze was steady, calm, and observing. Every movement, every intention, he noted, as though he were watching a map being drawn in real time. He reached for his phone but did not immediately call the police. First, he needed to understand the situation fully. He watched the group carefully, noting their numbers, their positions, and the way they moved. He could see the fear beginning to spread in the neighborhood as well. Lights flickered on in nearby houses, curtains parted, and neighbors peeked from behind closed doors, unsure what to do. No one could have guessed what kind of man was standing silently inside that house, his calm presence a shield in the midst of chaos. The group was careless, thinking they were powerful and brave in the dark. They smashed the mailbox first, laughing as it fell to the ground. Then they moved on to the front windows, throwing objects with reckless abandon. Yet he remained calm, observing every detail. His body was tense but controlled. His mind was analyzing everything. How many were there, how fast they moved, how they reacted when startled, and what their weaknesses were. Every small mistake they made was another advantage for him, even if they did not know it. One of them kicked the front door lightly, testing it. They assumed it would be easy to intimidate him into submission. They did not know that he had spent years learning how to stay calm under pressure, how to think quickly, and how to remain in control when others were panicking. He did not rush to the door or confront them yet. Instead, he stayed inside, observing and calculating, preparing for what would come next. Every move he had learned from years of intense training came into play now. But on the surface, he looked calm, almost passive. The group then began yelling, calling out hateful names, trying to provoke him, hoping to see a reaction that would satisfy their anger. Their words echoed through the night, sharp and cruel, but he did not react to their insults. He did not shout back, he did not move toward them, and he did not give them the satisfaction of fear or anger. Instead, he stayed quiet, his mind working faster than they could imagine. He knew that reacting emotionally would be a mistake, but observing and preparing could give him complete control of the situation. Neighbors who had been watching from a distance began to whisper to one another, unsure what to do. Some were scared to come outside, some wanted to intervene, but none had the courage to confront the group. They could see the destruction, hear the shouting, and feel the tension, but they had no idea about the man inside the house. To them, he seemed like any other quiet neighbor, perhaps too calm for the chaos outside. What they did not know was that this calm was deliberate, trained, and unshakable. The group moved to the side of the house, breaking smaller windows, reaching inside to try and grab objects, throwing things across the yard. They laughed and jeered, thinking their plan was succeeding. But he had already anticipated many of their actions. He had mapped their positions, counted them more than once, and noticed the gaps in their attention. Even if they tried to overwhelm him, he had prepared for this. His calmness was not weakness, it was strategy. At one point, one of the intruders tripped over a small garden stone, falling heavily to the ground. The others laughed, but he noticed something important: the way they reacted to each other, their lack of coordination, their overconfidence. Each small mistake was a clue, a detail that would help him take control without losing calm or precision. He did not move yet, did not act impulsively. Instead, he allowed them to make themselves obvious, leaving mistakes uncorrected until he was ready to respond. He finally called the police, but even that call was calm and deliberate. He described the situation clearly without panic, giving details about the group, their numbers, and their actions. He did not exaggerate or allow fear to influence his words. While the authorities were on their way, he continued observing, learning everything he could. He made mental notes of the tools they were using, their speed, their height, their reactions. Each detail would become important if the situation escalated further. Time seemed to stretch as the group continued their destruction. Every loud crash and every hateful word echoed in the quiet neighborhood, but he remained composed. He moved silently from window to window, keeping track of every intruder. He checked locks, ensured that the house was secure, and positioned himself in places where he could observe and protect. His movements were deliberate, precise, and careful. To an outsider, it might have seemed like he was pacing nervously, but every step was calculated, every action purposeful. The vandals eventually became frustrated. Their laughter began to falter, replaced by confusion and irritation. They had assumed fear, resistance, or anger would come quickly. They did not understand that he had no intention of reacting impulsively. The calmness that they had mistaken for weakness was actually strength, and it unsettled them in ways they did not recognize. They began making mistakes, tripping, dropping objects, bumping into each other. Each mistake gave him more information, more confidence, and more control. By the time the police arrived, the group had started to scatter. Some ran away, others hesitated, unsure of what to do next. The authorities found him standing in his living room, calm, composed, and completely in control. Nothing about his demeanor suggested fear or panic. He showed the police the damage, the evidence, and calmly explained everything that had happened. The intruders were arrested or chased away, but what amazed everyone was the lack of fear in him. The calmness, the composure, the control. Everyone could see it, but no one fully understood it. Afterward, as he began assessing the damage, neighbors came over cautiously. They expressed concern, fear, and amazement. Some had called the authorities and watched from their windows, unsure how to act. They could see that the situation had been dangerous, that the intruders were aggressive and hateful, and that the man in the house had handled everything with unmatched calm. They began to realize that there was much more to him than they had ever known. He did not boast about what had happened. He did not speak of strength or courage. He simply repaired what needed fixing, cleaned up the mess, and ensured that everyone around him was safe. To him, it was just another situation that required careful thought, patience, and controlled action. To everyone else, it was something extraordinary, a quiet man who had faced chaos and destruction with the calmness and precision of someone who had been trained to survive the unimaginable. The night left the neighborhood shaken, but it also left them with a sense of awe. They had underestimated him as the intruders had, and they had been wrong. There was a quiet power in him, a discipline and control that no one had expected, and while he did not seek attention or recognition, the events of that night began to change how people saw him. No longer just a quiet neighbor, he was someone who had faced danger calmly, thought clearly, and emerged in complete control. The calm after the storm was a testament to his hidden strength, one that very few had ever seen or would understand. As he finally settled for the night, sitting in his living room with the dim light casting soft shadows, he allowed himself a small sigh, not of relief but of readiness. The world was unpredictable, people could be cruel, and chaos could strike when least expected. Yet he remained calm, observant, and prepared. The night's events had proven something important, not to others but to himself. Strength was not always loud or visible. Sometimes it was quiet, patient, and unseen until it was needed most. After the night of chaos, life in the neighborhood slowly returned to normal, or at least what passed for normal. The intruders had been chased away or arrested, and the streets were quiet again. But the calm of the days that followed held a different feeling for him. It was not the peace of before, the carefree quiet that allowed him to sit and watch the world go by. Now every shadow, every distant sound, every unusual movement carried weight. He had been through worse, yes, but experience had taught him that danger often comes quietly, and that even a moment's distraction could change everything. The neighbors who had once ignored him, who had waved politely but kept their distance, now looked at him differently. Some approached cautiously, offering help, asking if he was okay or if he needed anything. He responded politely, with calm gratitude, but did not dwell on it. Their curiosity, their fear, their admiration, it did not matter to him. What mattered was being ready, being aware, and staying in control. He had lived long enough to know that attention could be fleeting and unreliable, and that real security comes from preparation, not recognition, even in these quiet days. He found himself thinking about what had happened. He walked the perimeter of his home, examining the damage left behind, noting areas that needed repair, and mentally planning improvements to prevent a repeat of the attack. This was not paranoia. It was practicality. His mind worked like a map, plotting every angle, every possible point of intrusion, and considering how to reinforce them. He did not dwell on anger, on revenge, or on the hateful words sprayed across his walls. Instead, he studied them as evidence, reminders of human weakness, fear, and ignorance. Each mark was a lesson, each act of violence a scenario to learn from. It was during these moments, as he repaired and strengthened his home, that memories of the past began to surface, memories he rarely allowed to intrude. He remembered the early mornings before dawn, the grueling exercises that pushed his body to limits most could not imagine. He remembered long nights of planning missions, the weight of responsibility for the lives of others, and the constant need to stay calm when chaos reigned around him. His Navy SEAL training had been more than physical. It had been mental, emotional, and spiritual. It had forged discipline, patience, awareness, and control into habits that defined every action he took. Those habits had become second nature over the years. He moved through his home silently, efficiently, checking doors, windows, and escape routes without conscious thought. He could detect subtle shifts in the environment, small signs that most people would ignore: a creak in a floorboard, a shadow in a corner, a distant sound in the street. Even simple tasks like repairing a fence or trimming a bush were approached with care, not only for the quality of the work, but for the strategic awareness it allowed him to maintain. Every movement, every decision, was informed by training that had once saved lives in situations far more dangerous than a group of vandals. Neighbors began to notice subtle changes in him. He remained calm, yes, but there was an aura now. A quiet intensity that was impossible to ignore. People whispered among themselves, trying to guess what had happened that night. They did not know about the training, the missions, the discipline that shaped him, but they sensed that he was no ordinary man. Children who had once run past his yard now slowed, curious about the quiet figure who moved with purpose. Adults looked on with a mix of respect and caution. They did not need to understand him fully to recognize that he was capable, aware, and prepared for whatever might come. One afternoon, while repairing the front gate, his mind drifted back to his time in training. He remembered the long hours spent running, climbing, swimming, and lifting, pushing his body until every muscle ached and every thought focused on precision. He remembered learning to read the smallest details in a person's movement, to anticipate reactions before they happened, and to respond with calm, decisive action. These were not just memories. They were tools he still used every day. Every situation, even something as simple as a home repair, became an opportunity to practice observation, precision, and patience. He also thought about the missions that had tested him most, those moments when lives hung in the balance, when a single decision could mean the difference between survival and disaster. He had faced fire, water, heights, and darkness in ways most people could not imagine. Each mission had required complete focus, complete awareness, and complete control over fear. And though those missions were over, the lessons stayed with him. Calmness under pressure, patience, observation, and preparedness were not just habits, they were instincts, ingrained into every action he took. Neighbors occasionally approached him now, curious and cautious. They asked questions about his routines, complimented his garden, or commented on the repairs he had made after the attack. He answered politely, never boastful, never revealing more than necessary. It was not humility, it was strategy. He did not need approval or admiration. He needed security, awareness, and the ability to respond effectively if danger ever came again. And the more he maintained that quiet, disciplined life, the stronger his presence became even without words. Evenings remained his favorite part of the day. Sitting on the porch as the sun dipped below the horizon, he allowed himself to breathe, to reflect, and to observe. The shadows lengthened across the street. The wind rustled leaves gently, and the distant sounds of life reminded him that the world continued, even after chaos. He observed the patterns of movement around him, the way people walked, the way cars drove, the rhythm of everyday life. Even small things mattered because awareness of detail was always important. He had learned that the smallest detail, unnoticed by others, could change everything in a critical moment. The neighborhood, once quiet and uneventful, now held an underlying tension that no one could fully explain. People sensed it, felt it, and instinctively respected it. There was something different about him, a presence that was both calm and commanding, quiet and intense. They could not see the past, the training, the experiences that shaped him, but they could sense the effect. It was subtle, invisible, yet undeniable. It was a power that did not need to announce itself. It existed, quietly, and everyone around felt its weight. At night, he sometimes walked the perimeter of his property, moving silently through shadows, checking locks, reviewing the layout of the yard, and observing the environment as though preparing for a possible threat. Not because he wanted confrontation, but because he understood the unpredictability of life. Even in moments of peace, readiness mattered. It was a mindset forged in countless hours of intense preparation, experience, and discipline. He had learned that waiting calmly, observing closely, and acting decisively when necessary was far stronger than reacting impulsively. He also began to reflect on human nature. The attack had been fueled by ignorance, prejudice, and fear. He thought about the group of men who had tried to intimidate him, their overconfidence, their lack of awareness, and their mistakes. He realized that most people operate without understanding the consequences of their actions. They act impulsively, speak harshly, and assume they know the world around them. But the world is rarely simple, and strength is rarely obvious. His calm response to the attack had not been luck. It had been preparation, observation, and control, skills that came from training, experience, and understanding. As days turned into weeks, life continued, slowly returning to normal. Yet he remained vigilant. The garden continued to bloom under his care, repairs were made, and the neighborhood regained a sense of routine. But he knew that danger could return at any time, that people could act unpredictably, and that vigilance was not a choice. It was a necessity. He had faced the worst of humanity before, and he knew that peace is fragile, easily shattered by ignorance, hatred, or carelessness. Despite all this, he remained approachable, calm, and composed. Neighbors who had once hesitated to interact now spoke to him with respect and curiosity. Children smiled when they saw him working in the yard, and some adults sought advice or help. Yet he never revealed more than necessary. His strength was not in intimidation, but in quiet confidence, in calm observation, and in the readiness to act if needed. The contrast between his peaceful appearance and his hidden strength became a silent lesson for everyone around. And through it all, he never forgot the lessons of his past. Control your fear, observe the world, prepare for what may come, and act with precision when necessary. Calmness was not weakness, it was power. Patience was not passivity, it was strategy. Awareness was not obsession, it was survival. These were not abstract ideas. They were tools, habits, and instincts that defined every action he took, and they would define the actions to come. As the story of the intruders, the neighborhood, and his quiet strength continued to unfold. The quiet of the neighborhood was shattered again, but this time it was different. The intruders had returned, more confident, more aggressive, and more determined than before. They thought the first night had been a warning, a minor inconvenience, but they had no idea who they were dealing with. As they approached his property, laughing and shouting, the man inside remained calm. He did not panic, he did not rush, and he did not show fear. Instead, he moved silently, efficiently, positioning himself in the house where he could observe every entrance, every window, every corner. The first signs of trouble came when the group began banging on the front gate. They assumed it would be easy to intimidate him into submission. Their voices were loud, their movements brash, but he had already anticipated their approach. His mind worked quickly, recalling every detail from the previous encounter, noting their behavior, their overconfidence, their lack of coordination. Each sound, each shout, each footstep was information. He listened, analyzed, and prepared. He did not act immediately. Instead, he allowed them to make mistakes, to reveal their weaknesses, and to give him complete control. The group tried throwing objects at the windows, testing the strength of the glass and the man behind it. They kicked at doors, smashed small decorations, and shouted hateful words, hoping to provoke a reaction. But he remained calm, unshaken. He moved with purpose, checking the layout of the rooms, ensuring that every angle was covered. His hands were steady, his breathing controlled, and his mind focused. To an outsider, he might have seemed still, almost passive, but every movement was deliberate, every thought precise. He remembered his training, the hours of preparation that had taught him how to stay calm under pressure, how to assess threats, and how to respond with efficiency and precision. The difference between him and the intruders was clear. He had control, they had chaos. They acted impulsively, without thought, without awareness, while he observed, analyzed, and prepared. Each mistake they made was an opportunity, each reckless movement a chance to turn the situation to his advantage. As they continued, he quietly secured the doors and windows, making sure there was no way for them to enter the house. He then moved to a position where he could see the entire front yard without being seen. He noticed the tension growing among the group. They were expecting resistance, expecting fear, but they found neither. Their frustration began to show. One of them tripped over a garden hose, another stumbled over a stone he had placed weeks before. Every misstep revealed their lack of coordination, their overconfidence, and their underestimation of him. The man inside did not act out of anger or vengeance. He acted out of necessity, out of a deep understanding of danger and preparation. He began using his knowledge of strategy to contain the group. He moved quietly, positioning obstacles, subtly guiding their movements without their awareness. He used shadows, furniture, and natural barriers to create advantages for himself, ensuring that if they tried to advance, they would be at a disadvantage. Every move was calculated, precise, and deliberate. He could hear their voices, now laced with fear and confusion. They began to argue among themselves, blaming each other for mistakes, growing desperate as their confidence waned. He noticed everything, the patterns of their speech, the shifts in their tone, the way their eyes darted when they were unsure. All of this was valuable information, giving him the upper hand. He did not rush into confrontation. Instead, he allowed them to make themselves vulnerable. He knew that impatience could cost him. and he was not willing to take that risk. Then came the moment when the first real confrontation occurred. One of the intruders, emboldened by anger, tried to climb the gate to reach the yard. The man inside had anticipated this. He was already in position, ready to act. Using a calm and controlled approach, he blocked the intruder's movement, guiding him safely to the ground without unnecessary force. The intruder stumbled, surprised and confused, unsure how someone could react so quickly, so precisely without fear. The rest of the group froze, realizing that their plan had failed, that the man inside was not ordinary, and that they had underestimated him in every possible way. The police had been called again, and their arrival added to the tension. The intruders now faced not only a man who was calm and prepared, but also the law. Panic set in among them. They shouted. They tried to flee, but every exit had been anticipated, every movement predicted. The man inside continued to move with precision, positioning himself to ensure no one could escape without being noticed. He did not need to use force unnecessarily. His presence alone, calm and authoritative, was enough to control the situation. Neighbors who had watched from their windows and porches began to whisper among themselves. They could see the intruder's confusion, hear their panic, and observe the man inside the house calmly managing the chaos. It was unlike anything they had ever seen. They began to understand that there was more to him than the polite, quiet neighbor they thought they knew. There was a hidden strength, a discipline, and a level of awareness that few could imagine. They felt awe, respect, and a subtle fear, all at once. The confrontation lasted only a short while, though it felt much longer. The intruders tried to regain control, but every attempt failed. They were outmatched not by physical strength alone, but by intelligence, preparation, and composure. The man inside used every skill he had learned through years of training: observation, patience, strategy, and control. He never acted recklessly. He never gave them the chance to regain the upper hand. By the time the authorities arrived fully, the intruders were already contained, disoriented, and powerless. When the police entered, they found him standing calmly in the living room, watching the situation with steady eyes. He spoke clearly, explained what had happened, and showed them the evidence. The intruders were apprehended safely without further harm. The officers could not hide their amazement at the calmness and control he exhibited. It was clear that he had handled a dangerous situation with more skill than anyone could have expected. They asked questions, tried to understand how he had managed to contain the intruders so effectively, but he answered simply, without pride or exaggeration. His actions spoke louder than words. After the confrontation, the neighborhood was quiet again, but it was different this time. People walked more carefully, observed more closely, and some even approached him with curiosity and respect. They wanted to understand how he had managed what had seemed impossible. They could see the calm strength in him, the discipline and the intelligence, but he did not seek recognition. He did not boast or show off. To him, it was simply the result of preparation, awareness, and control. What mattered was safety. What mattered was maintaining peace, and what mattered was being ready for whatever might come next. He spent the following days repairing the damage done during the confrontation. Broken windows were fixed, fences mended, and walls cleaned of the hateful words sprayed by the intruders. Yet even in these ordinary tasks, he maintained his calm, disciplined approach. He moved efficiently, purposefully, and with awareness of everything around him. Every action, no matter how small, was deliberate. He had learned that control is not only necessary during chaos, but also during recovery. How one responds afterward shapes the future. Neighbors continued to observe him, sometimes asking questions about his routines, sometimes simply watching in admiration. They could see that he was not an ordinary man, but he never explained more than necessary. He believed that true strength is quiet, disciplined, and unseen until it is required. Recognition was unnecessary. Respect, if earned naturally, was far more meaningful than forced admiration. He also reflected on the intruders, on their mistakes, and on the dangers that ignorance and hatred create. He thought about how easily a situation can escalate when people act impulsively, without awareness, without preparation. He knew that calmness and control could prevent disaster, and he had proven it. But he also knew that vigilance was necessary. Peace is never guaranteed, and those who respect it most are often those who are prepared for its absence. In these days after the confrontation, he began to rebuild more than just his home. He rebuilt his confidence in the world around him, strengthened his sense of control, and reaffirmed his commitment to calmness and awareness. He continued his routines tending the garden, maintaining the house, and observing the neighborhood. He continued to teach in subtle ways the value of preparation, patience, and careful observation. The neighborhood itself began to change. People walked more carefully, spoke more respectfully, and slowly learned to understand that the quiet man in the house was not ordinary. His presence became a symbol of calm strength, of discipline, and of the power of awareness. People still went about their lives, children still played, and families still walked their dogs, but there was a new respect in the air, a recognition that strength can be quiet, and that preparation and calm can overcome chaos and aggression. Evenings remained his favorite time. Sitting on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, he reflected on the confrontation, the lessons learned, and the path ahead. He did not dwell on anger, revenge, or fear. He focused on readiness, awareness, and calm. He knew that the world is unpredictable, that danger can return at any moment, and that the strength to respond must always be maintained. His calmness, patience, and precision had turned a dangerous situation into a controlled one, and those skills would continue to serve him in the days ahead. The morning after the confrontation, the neighborhood was quiet but charged with a new energy. The chaos of the previous nights had faded, yet the memory of what had happened remained vivid. People spoke in hushed tones about the events, the intruders, and the calm, composed man who had managed everything with extraordinary precision. They had seen the results but not the effort behind them. They had witnessed control without panic, strategy without aggression, and courage without the need for boasting. The man himself moved quietly through his home, repairing what had been damaged, cleaning up debris, and restoring order without a single word of complaint. He started by carefully examining the damage, walking slowly from room to room. Broken windows needed to be fixed. Scratches on the walls required attention, and scattered debris had to be cleared. Every task he undertook was methodical, precise, and calm. He worked steadily, taking breaks only when necessary, never rushing, never showing frustration. Even as he repaired his home, he remained observant of the neighborhood, aware of subtle changes in movement, sound, and light. It was not obsession. It was habit, a trained awareness that had been part of him long before the attacks. Neighbors began to approach, cautiously at first. Some offered help, while others simply stood at a distance watching. They wanted to understand what had happened, to learn from him, to perhaps feel a fraction of the calm and confidence he seemed to carry effortlessly. But he responded simply, politely, and without any hint of pride. He did not need recognition, for he had learned that strength speaks for itself silently and consistently. Even in these moments, his calm presence seemed to reassure the neighborhood. People sensed that, despite the violence and hatred they had witnessed, everything was under control. As he worked, thoughts returned to the intruders. He reflected on their behavior, their mistakes, and their lack of awareness. He understood that their actions were fueled by ignorance and prejudice, by overconfidence and thoughtless aggression. Yet he did not dwell on anger. Instead, he focused on lessons, analyzing how they had acted, how he had responded, and how situations like this could be prevented in the future. It was a careful, reflective mindset, one that allowed him to stay calm and prepared without letting emotions cloud his judgment. The legal process began soon after. Reports were filed, and authorities handled the intruders according to the law. He cooperated fully, providing detailed information about their actions, the sequence of events, and their behavior. The intruders faced consequences for their actions, but he did not pursue vengeance. Justice, he believed, was not about personal satisfaction. It was about balance, order, and ensuring that dangerous behavior was addressed in a fair and lawful way. He understood that revenge could lead to chaos, while measured action created lasting results. In the days that followed, neighbors began to treat him differently. The quiet man they had once known had revealed a strength that could not be ignored. People began to respect him not out of fear, but because they saw the discipline, awareness, and courage he demonstrated. Some came to him for advice, asking questions about safety, preparedness, or even daily life skills. He responded patiently, sharing knowledge without boasting, teaching through calm example rather than words alone. His actions, more than anything he said, became lessons for those around him. Even children in the neighborhood began to notice. They had watched from a distance during the chaos, seen his calm face and witnessed the way he managed danger with control and intelligence. They were curious now, approaching him with innocent questions about gardening, home repair, and life in general. He answered patiently, encouraging curiosity and observation, subtly teaching the value of calmness, awareness, and preparation. The lessons he imparted were not about fear or aggression, but about thinking clearly, acting decisively, and understanding the consequences of actions. He also took time to reflect on his own life, the events that had shaped him, and the lessons he had learned through years of rigorous training and experience. He thought about the difficult missions he had undertaken, the challenges he had faced, and the discipline that had been required to survive. Those experiences had taught him that calmness under pressure was more powerful than anger, patience more effective than impulsive action, and observation more valuable than reaction. These lessons were not abstract. They were tools that he applied daily, whether in a dangerous mission or simply tending his home. One afternoon, he walked through his yard, checking the repairs, arranging plants, and ensuring everything was in order. He noticed neighbors walking past, giving him respectful nods or small smiles. They did not fully understand the depth of his experiences, the years of preparation, or the training that had made him capable of handling the attacks. Yet they sensed the calm authority in his presence, the quiet assurance that everything was safe. They realized that strength can be subtle, and that courage does not always announce itself loudly. The community began to slowly change. People spoke more carefully, respected boundaries, and learned to recognize that appearances can be misleading. They realized that calmness can be strength and preparation can prevent disaster. The neighborhood, once marked by casual fear and ignorance, began to gain a subtle sense of security. Residents understood that the man in their midst was not only capable of protecting himself, but also of influencing others simply through his presence and example. He also used this time to teach, quietly and naturally. He offered advice on home security, encouraged awareness of surroundings, and subtly modeled patience and observation. He never forced lessons upon anyone. Instead, people learned by watching him, seeing how he moved, how he reacted, and how he handled challenges calmly and effectively. It was a living demonstration of principles that could guide anyone, not just in extraordinary circumstances, but in everyday life. At night, he returned to his favorite routine, sitting on the porch as the sun set. The quiet that had once been broken by violence now felt peaceful, reflective, and restorative. He allowed himself to think about the journey he had been on, the challenges he had faced, and the ways he had grown. He understood that true strength lies in preparation, calmness, and awareness. He understood that courage is not loud but deliberate, and that discipline is more powerful than impulsive action. He also considered the intruders, those who had sought to disrupt his life. He felt no personal hatred, only understanding. They had acted out of ignorance, fear, and overconfidence. Their downfall had been a lack of awareness, a lack of preparation, and a failure to understand the consequences of their actions. He had shown that control, patience, and careful observation could turn chaos into order, fear into calm, and danger into safety. Days turned into weeks, and life continued. The neighborhood slowly returned to its normal rhythm, but with a new understanding of respect, caution, and awareness. People continued to watch him, sometimes with curiosity, sometimes with admiration, but always with a subtle recognition of the strength he embodied. He remained the same quiet, disciplined man he had always been, tending his garden, repairing his home, and moving through life with calm awareness. In private moments, he reflected on the lessons of the past weeks. He thought about how quickly chaos can arise, how fragile peace can be, and how essential preparation and awareness are in every aspect of life. He realized that the events had not changed who he was, but they had strengthened the bonds between him and his community. People now understood in a small but meaningful way that appearances can be deceiving, and that true strength often lies beneath the surface, quietly waiting to act when needed. He also thought about responsibility. Strength, he knew, is not only about defending oneself, it is also about using that strength wisely, protecting others, and influencing the world positively. The intruders had threatened the peace of the neighborhood, but his calm, measured response had restored it. He had shown that courage and control can coexist, that intelligence can overcome aggression, and that preparation can prevent disaster. These were lessons that extended far beyond his home, beyond the neighborhood, and into the world itself. As time went on, the neighborhood healed. Gardens bloomed, fences were mended, and children played safely in the streets once again. The memory of the attacks lingered, but it was no longer a source of fear. Instead, it became a story of resilience, of calm strength, and of the quiet power of preparation. Neighbors now respected not only his actions, but the principles that guided them: observation, patience, discipline, and awareness. Even as life returned to routine, he remained vigilant. He continued his walks, his quiet observations, and his careful maintenance of home and surroundings. He had learned that peace is fragile, that life is unpredictable, and that true strength lies not in visible power, but in readiness, calmness, and intelligence. His presence alone reminded the neighborhood that safety and strength can coexist quietly, without noise or showmanship. And so, life went on. The quiet man who had once seemed ordinary became a symbol of resilience, calm strength, and wisdom. He had faced chaos, observed carefully, acted decisively, and restored order. He had shown the neighborhood, and perhaps even himself, that courage is not always loud, that strength is often invisible, and that patience, preparation, and awareness are the greatest tools anyone can have. His home remained a place of calm, his presence a reassurance, and his life a quiet testament to the power of discipline and control. In the end, the neighborhood understood something important. True strength is not measured by words or appearances, but by actions, by calmness under pressure, and by the ability to face danger with intelligence and courage. The man in the house had proven it, not through show but through living example. And for those who had once doubted, who had once whispered, or who had once been afraid, his life had become a lesson they would never forget.